prochaine présentation, c'est, si je ne m'abuse, il s'agit de François Mabille. Oui, François Mabille, c'est à vous. Alors, François va traiter de la transformation de la FIUC et François dispose de 10 minutes.
Merci, Chantal. Je ne vais pas utiliser en fait les 10 minutes parce que nous avons une journée qui est très chargée. Voilà. Je voulais simplement, pour introduire la prochaine table ronde, revenir sur ce qui a été demandé hier. Et j'aurais dû sans doute vous préciser l'ordonnancement de ces 2 dernières journées. Hier, l'un d'entre nous disait « Nous manquons peut-être un peu de temps pour réfléchir sur la fédération, son évolution et certains de ses thèmes structurants ». Et justement, aujourd'hui et demain, nous allons avoir le temps de travailler tout de même sur certains de ces sujets. Nous allons commencer dès ce matin avec une table ronde sur la question des technologies disruptives. Je vous disais hier, nous allons essayer de structurer la fédération autour de 4 grands pôles. L'un de ces pôles, c'est un pôle prospective. Vous avez eu dans vos sacs un rapport qui a été écrit par l'une des dernières personnes arrivées à la FIUC, Corinne Mellul, qui va être sur la scène dans quelques minutes. Corinne connaît de longue date les universités catholiques pour avoir travaillé à la Catho de Paris et à la Catho de Lille. Elle est également maître de conf à Sciences Po Paris et elle est l'auteur de ce rapport. Donc c'est pour nous une occasion non seulement de discuter du thème, mais plus largement de réfléchir sur la nécessité de s'engager sur des thèmes plus prospectifs désormais au sein de la fédération. Et puis cet après-midi, nous allons discuter des questions de solidarité entre nos universités. Demain, nous aurons l'occasion de travailler sur les programmes de recherche au sein de la fédération et on finira vendredi par un thème extrêmement important. L'une d'entre nous, Leslie, a fait tout un travail sur la notion de campus intégral et donc la manière dont nos identités catholiques évoluent. Donc vous voyez, nous allons avoir 2 journées qui vont être scandées par 4 rendez-vous qui tournent autour de thèmes structurants pour la fédération et pour notre travail commun. Donc je voudrais simplement que vous ayez cela en tête pour recevoir les différentes interventions qui vont être faites tout au long de ces 2 journées. Merci.
Merci François. On me dit que le président Rubens m'a signalé que hier, à la présentation des états financiers vérifiés, on avait omis de proposer leur approbation. Bon, alors je pense qu'il faut faire une motion pour l'approbation des états financiers vérifiés pour l'année fiscale 2017 et le rapport d'activité. Donc, est-ce que quelqu'un pourrait proposer? Non? Oui? Et quelqu'un pour seconder, s'il vous plaît? Je vais prendre votre nom plus tard. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui veut seconder la motion pour approuver les états financiers et le rapport d'activité? OK, c'est beau, Canada. Donc, est-ce que ça prend un vote? En faveur de l'approbation des états financiers vérifiés et du rapport d'activité. Vous levez la main, s'il vous plaît. Bon, oui, raise your hand. And abstentions? Against? Very good, thank you. Alors, nous allons maintenant procéder. Est-ce que tout le monde a la traduction? Je vais parler dans le micro, voilà. Alors, nous allons maintenant procéder à la prochaine activité. Là, j'ai perdu ma page. Qui est la table ronde. Donc, c'est la présentation du rapport de la FIUC sur la problématique des technologies émergentes pour les universités. Alors, je demanderai aux participants de venir à l'avant. Alors, Corinne Mellul, conseillère principale de la FIUC. Oui. Oui.
There's many of us wondering about the voting process for this morning, and we don't know where the room is or how that's working.
Alors, François?
Oui.
Pour le vote.
Alors pour le vote, vous m'entendez bien? Oui. Pour le vote, c'est très simple. Il vous suffit d'aller dans la salle où, quand vous êtes arrivé, vous êtes enregistré. C'est-à-dire là, vous allez avoir des tables pour voter et l'équipe de la FIUC est à votre disposition pour justement vous accompagner dans ce processus de vote. Donc la salle de vote s'appelle Renegan Hall et elle est un petit peu plus loin de la salle où ont lieu les déjeuners et les dîners. Okay. Voilà. Donc vous pouvez voter à partir de 9h30 jusqu'à midi. Merci.
Is everybody clear about the location for the vote? Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Good morning, everyone. Rather than actually presenting the report that I wrote on emerging technologies and their impact on higher education and the labor market, the workplace, I chose to draw a few things out of the report that I thought could stimulate some debate. And so everything I'm going to say is one way or another in the report, but I'm not really going to talk about the report, which I hope you'll read or at least browse through. I thought I'd start this talk on evolving trends in higher education with a little vignette of an event that took place exactly a week ago at the White House. Last Thursday, Donald Trump signed an executive order creating a National Council for the American Worker, so it's called, a body aimed at providing retraining for some 3.8 million students and workers over the next 5 years that involves the participation of 23 major American corporations. The executive order aims to, quote, ensure that America's students and workers have access to affordable, relevant, and innovative education and job training, end quote. Now, what's remarkable about this is that present in the East Room with Trump as he was signing the order were the heads of Walmart, FedEx, and Microsoft, among other CEOs of big corporations, but not a single university or college president. Obviously, education was a central issue in this event, but not a single representative of higher education was in the room, and no one from higher education had even been consulted or had any input in the project. At first glance, it seems to be in keeping with an administration that has consistently perhaps looked down on higher education, or viewed higher education with suspicion, and mainly as yet another tool for training and retraining. So you might ask, why bother to mention this event? Because, however we might view the Trump administration's overall concern with higher education, this executive order is, of course, another indicator of a trend that's been in the making for a few decades now, which I've tried to retrace in my report on the impact of emerging technologies on higher education and the workplace, which and this is the only thing I'll really say about it, is a sort of preliminary assessment of the issue, hopefully to be followed by more substantive projects in the future. So what I propose to do here for the next few minutes is to outline the main questions raised by the emergence of digital technologies, by automation, by robotization and artificial intelligence, both in higher education and in the labor market, and then suggest a couple of directions for a reflection on the subject. To that end, I will first provide some political and economic contextualization for this debate, much like in the report, but much more briefly, hopefully, by broadly looking back on the changes of the past few decades that have brought us to today. In other words, to a time when, according to the prevailing wisdom, we may be facing the end of higher education as we know it. Then in the second part, I will address more specifically the issue of what traditional missions of higher education are being impacted and propose some suggestions on what missions may be a fitting response to these exponential changes. You have the outline right there. First, then, some contextualization. The political and economic environment for the sea change underway in higher education is, of course, the context of globalization. While the broad lines of this context are evidently known to all of us, I would like to emphasize the four interconnected key points in it that I believe can guide our thinking. Point number one, well, I'll have to tell you about point number one, but you won't be able to see it. Did I turn it off without, or what's going on? I thought I did what I was told to do. Comment on passe ça là? Nicolas est reparti. Okay, I'll try once again, and if not, you'll just have to take my word for it. How about that? C'est ça? Okay, that's it. All right, here we go. You can learn at any age. So, four key points interconnected that I'd like to single out to stimulate the debate. Point number one, it is against the backdrop of globalization, roughly from the 1980s, that with the opening up of physical and later virtual borders through ICT across the globe, higher education comes to be viewed gradually and predominantly today as a service or a product proposed to students in many countries at rapidly increasing costs to the user. In other words, students and families who have become the customers for this product or service. Point number two, the political context in which these changes start to expand is the post-Cold War world, a world where the role of ideology and of alternative models of society has virtually collapsed, and market rules take over across the planet. This includes, therefore, higher education, an area where traditionally the value of what was delivered was either non-quantifiable or, at the very least, difficult to quantify. Point number three is the fact that as globalization expands, the free movement of people, of finance, of goods through borders, what has by then become the market of higher education is increasingly competitive, pitting many universities and colleges no longer only on a national scale but across the world against one another to attract students, much as companies that manufacture similar products or offer similar services compete against one another in a free market. Fourth and final point, as all of this is happening and as a result of it, the concept itself of what higher education is and should deliver begins to shift. Not just from a framework that fosters the broad pursuit of higher learning to a facility that provides a commodity, but also from a project that seeks to impart on the young the love of knowledge for its own sake, and a path to self-fulfillment through life, to a service that should guarantee a satisfying professional career with sizable earnings through life. What these four interconnected points have in common is that they are symptomatic of one single phenomenon, which is, like the rest of the world, the field of higher education has been overtaken overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly by an economic rationale. What is behind the now common terms of commoditization or commercialization, or to some extent also internationalization of higher education. Now, the point of going back to this broad context of the emerging technologies of today is to emphasize that there is a straight line between the broad context, which I've just reminded you of, and the emerging technologies. And that straight line is the fact that the research and innovation behind the emerging technologies is vastly guided, vastly not entirely, but vastly, by a business rationale, the rationale of profit-making. This may seem self-evident, but I strongly believe that a reflection on the evolving role of colleges and universities should be centered on the idea that we, as a global society, are being guided by an economic impetus that, along with the progress it brings, and it brings undoubtedly progress, also involves many dangers and possible aberrations for society as a whole. And this is where a new role for higher education may come in. As we see the emerging technologies penetrate higher education on and off campus across the world, whether in the form of e-learning or learning analytics or the flipped classroom, teaching assistant robots, among multiple forms of digital and AI pedagogical innovations, this should be the time for institutions of higher learning to start thinking about how they can aim for something higher than just ways to simply react to these trends and or keep pace with them. Which leads me to my second part, the question of how the traditional missions of higher education are being impacted and where higher education might want to go as a result. Here I will first briefly recap the broad significance of this revolution for the traditional missions of higher education, and then to conclude, I will offer some perspectives on the paths that universities and colleges may consider pursuing. First, what has already changed and is continuing to change with respect to the traditional missions of higher education. And let me point out three main dimensions here. Okay, works. Dimension one, the mission of higher education to promote the love of knowledge for its own sake, whether you call it the pursuit of truth or the quest for intellectual self-development or the fostering of critical thinking. With the changes occurring today and their economic rationale, this historical mission of universities is greatly called into question. What should and will be the worth of intellectual pursuit and critical thinking in a world where outcomes are quantified and mainly assessed in economic terms? Second dimension, the mission of universities as institutions that train the ethically responsible, politically aware, and socially engaged adults of tomorrow. No quantifiable outcomes at first sight in this respect either. Though I assume few would fiercely argue that this mission should disappear, should come to an end, the same question here begs to be asked: what should and will be the worth of ethical and moral values in a world where outcomes are quantified and mainly assessed in economic terms? With these 2 points already, there is a vast area for institutions of higher learning to engage in an effort of reflection and advocacy that frankly, they are naturally better equipped to lead than any other institution in society. The third dimension, the mission indeed to train young people to acquire competencies and skills that will enable them to aspire to better employment, not just financially rewarding, but also personally fulfilling, which has always been part of the broader mission of higher education. How do universities find their place in an age where the solutions put forth by most experts are lifelong learning, lifelong training, and the cultivation of soft skills that are meant to accompany scientific and technological skills? Where do universities fit in as actors whose historical role has been to impart over a period of at least 3 to 4 years knowledge that was supposed to last and produce employment for a lifetime? What do universities do when we are now told that students must learn to learn rather than learn contents? And when jobs that existed 15 years ago have disappeared, while a host of jobs that will exist 15 years from now have not even been invented yet. What is the place of universities when non-degree educational and vocational training are being increasingly pointed out, including by governments, as the way to the future of employment? These are the daunting questions faced by institutions of higher learning today. It won't come to you as a surprise that I don't have the answers to these questions, but what I can do, by way of conclusion, is suggest an open to debate, broadly, not necessarily right after I'm finished, a couple of perspectives on the paths that universities and colleges may consider pursuing. Solutions already developing in the international market of higher education include guiding principles such as decompartmentalizing of disciplines, the promotion of transversal competency, the reshaping of higher education toward diversified lifelong training offers, and the fostering of those soft skills that should supplement the renewable technical and scientific skills that the workers of tomorrow will need. We could debate the pertinence, the feasibility of these solutions, the desirability for institutions of higher learning to engage in these solutions. But what I would like to conclude this talk with is 2 strong suggestions which aim to be the starting point of another debate. First suggestion is that the colleges and universities of tomorrow could make it a new mission to impart on students the sense of ethical consciousness and responsibility that will guide them students, to steer the AI revolution toward humane, compassionate, and socially mindful goals, away from the doomsday scenarios where the human form of intelligence is ultimately overtaken by the artificial one. Second suggestion, that the college and universities of tomorrow, instead of just reacting to developing trends, could also make it a new mission to become major actors of the fourth revolution, not just as hubs of technological innovation, but also, and equally importantly, as proponents of ethically responsible thinking that can compel the driving forces of the fourth revolution, vastly guided by the economic logic of profit-making, to begin to think ethically about the kind of world they are taking us to. And my concluding remark will be this, that while these could be, should be, the new missions of all universities and colleges that can garner the resources to engage in these efforts, there's no doubt that Catholic universities, as institutions that have traditionally served higher ideals in their educational mission, should be among the eminent academic actors of these 2 innovative missions. Thank you very much for your attention and patience. We're going to move to the second segment of this session, you have yours, right?
OK, puis c'est ça qui dure jusqu'à 10 heures. OK.
Let me introduce you. Okay. The second part of this segment. Yeah, I'm just looking for. Je cherche ma page. Page of introduction. Thank you. So time to turn to the second part of this segment with our guest, Dr. Kaśka PORAYSKA-POMSTA. Did I say it right? Wow. She's an associate professor in adaptive technologies for learning at the University College London Knowledge Lab. She's head of research for the Department of Culture, Communication and Media at UCL Institute of Education. She's a member of the management committee for the Bloomsbury Center for Educational Neuroscience, the steering committee for the UCL Institute of Digital Health, and a member of the executive board for the International Society for Artificial Intelligence in Education. That's her field. Her research focuses on AI in education with a specific emphasis on developing adaptive, interactive environments for learning. She has over 20 years of experience in working with different learners, including children and adults with and without special needs. Kaśka is an active participant in the current debates on the role of artificial intelligence in human development and in learning. And one of her overall research objectives is to seek to articulate ways to harness AI for human benefit and not against. And now I'll let you tell us what part of your expertise you're going to share with us today.
Shall I use the microphone? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about artificial intelligence challenges and opportunities for education. I have very little time to talk about this. It's a huge field, so forgive me if this presentation is going to be very general. We're going to have questions at the end and a debate, so please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask questions. I'm just going to keep... Yes. Okay, so I have been asked by Corinne to give a broad introduction to artificial intelligence in education. And one of the main reasons, I suspect, and we heard from Corinne earlier, is because AI surrounds us every day, it seems. And it has been a steady kind of emergent phenomenon, but all of a sudden we woke up one morning and AI was there with us. But so, you know, we hear from, we hear about AI being applied in healthcare, to policing, to driverless cars, to social media, which are used to manipulate the political outcomes. And indeed, we are increasingly seeing AI being discussed in the context of education. But our understanding of AI, even though we are familiar with the term, and even though we have some sort of idea of what it may be, and I'm actually curious to hear what you think it is. Any ideas? No? Machine learning? Yes? Robots? Anything else? Okay, these are the main kinds of things that we tend to associate with artificial intelligence. And the main sources of our knowledge about AI, for most part, come from two sources. One is popular media, and the other one is science fiction. And I would argue that these are not the most informed sources of knowledge that would empower us with an ability to actually engage with the phenomenon of artificial intelligence and to allow us to make informed decisions about how we could and should design AI for the social benefit more generally, but more specifically for the benefit of human learning and development. So what I want to do is to actually define artificial intelligence as we do it in research, because I think it's a very useful thing to have at our disposal. So in order to do this, I will use the definition, it's a classic definition from Russell and Norvig, from their handbook on artificial intelligence, the modern approach, and this is something that undergraduate students in computer science and artificial intelligence are presented with quite promptly upon starting their studies. According to this definition, AI is defined along 2 dimensions, roughly. The top layer relates to thinking processes and reasoning. The bottom layer relates to behavior. But what is actually really useful about this definition is that it also provides us a sense of how to measure success of an AI system. On the right, you're right, the measure of success is along the fidelity to human cognitive processes. On the right, however, the measurement is made, the measure of success is along some predefined concept of intelligence. And it doesn't mean that it actually has to have anything to do with replicating or emulating human behaviors. So now why do I think that this definition is really important to take into account? Well, there are 4 reasons. The first one is that it highlights that AI, artificial intelligence, is not the same as human intelligence, okay? The second one, and that expands on the first point, is that the emphasis in this definition is on computational efficiency rather than on the fidelity to the cognitive processes. The third one is that this definition is technique agnostic. So whether we use machine learning or robots or rule-based systems, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether the system achieves its goals given some prescribed definition of intelligence, okay? So this highlights a really fundamental misunderstanding, I think, in the popular psyche, that kind of somehow presumes or assumes that AI, artificial intelligence, acts like us, is like us. It's not, okay? And the fourth thing that this definition allows us to do, so just before I move on, I just wanted to say that actually most of the developments to date in artificial intelligence focus on this lower right quadrant. Okay, so we are looking at systems that act rationally, so they are doing the right thing, meaning that is expected to maximize goal achievement given the available information. Okay, so I'll let you ponder that for a little bit longer and maybe bring it up in the discussion later on, because I think it's a really critical point. So the fourth thing that is really important about this definition is the fact that it allows us to take a step back and appreciate the fact, if we take the entire definition, all of the 4 quadrants, that artificial intelligence, whether it stays truthful to cognitive processes or not, is a multifaceted discipline. It allows us to do 3 principal things. It allows us to ask hard questions about what is intelligence. So in a way, it's a form of philosophy. The other thing that it's a methodology. So it provides us with potential tools, in this case these are computational tools, for addressing those hard questions in a very systematic way, okay? In very contrived contexts, very often, and very limited contexts, but nevertheless, these are useful methods to use. And the third thing that it allows us to do is to build applications, to build solutions. And this is really what has happened over the past 5 years, 2 to 5 years, when AI actually shifted from a purely theoretical discipline to one which is applied in the real world. And we are overemphasizing at the moment and panicking, quite frankly, about the application side without actually taking stock of the philosophical and the methodological, and without having access to a really concrete definition of what artificial intelligence is and what it aims to do, and fundamentally that it actually is quite different from us. So we have a lot of fears emerging from this ignorance, and we can think of a multitude of different issues that AI brings with it, the challenges, which I will highlight in a second. But there are also good things about AI. And this is something that is the focus of artificial intelligence in education, where we are looking at a whole range of questions, from how do we learn, how do we solve problems, how do we feel during the learning processes, and how can we adapt our interventions to the individual needs of the learners. And just to bootstrap what I'm going to say next, and to highlight the challenges and the opportunities. Sorry, what are you pointing at? Wow, right, okay. Okay, so this is very quickly, this is an example from artificial human being. What I want to, so I don't have much time, so I'm just going to cut to the chase. So this is an artificial agent, AI artificial agents, which is able to make autonomous decisions in the moment. This has been designed for the purpose of coaching young people at risk of social exclusion from unemployment in practicing social interaction skills in situ, and exploring and preparing themselves for job interviews. What you see on the left is the display of the models that are being generated while young people are interacting with this agent. And what is really important about this is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, this is one of the main challenges, especially with machine learning, is that the models that are being generated are typically black boxes. They are closed to the human view. We don't know what is happening underneath them. We don't know how AI is making their decisions. And so what we're doing in AI in educational context, and this is really quite critical for learning, is that we are opening up those models to the learners and practitioners to provide them with very concrete basis for discussion, negotiation, setting of the future learning goals. And this is really where learning happens as we go about evaluating these systems. So finally, where are the challenges and opportunities? There are 4 main ones which occur at the intersection of artificial intelligence and education. The first one is autonomy. The purpose of education is to to foster independence and lifelong learners. So autonomy is really fundamental. It's a fundamental dimension that we are trying to furnish our learners with. But autonomy is also a fundamental driving force behind artificial intelligence. We want to create artificial... I have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Plus the interruption. So the purpose of AI is to create autonomous agents that make independent decisions. So how do we actually balance between human and artificial autonomy is really critical for how we are able to support human learners. Explainability is another important dimension. If we cannot explain our decisions, then we cannot really foster learning in a best pedagogical practices sense. Accountability is the third dimension that we need to take into account. It doesn't only relate to ethics, as Corinne has also highlighted in her presentation. It also relates very fundamentally to the kind of models on the basis of which we are building our interventions. Our models, theoretical models, be it from psychology or from education, are inherently biased. Okay, so we are now facing a real crisis, especially again with machine learning, where bias is becoming a real problem. But we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, where does this bias come from? Where does it originate? It originates with us and with our models. So we have a huge challenge here. And finally, there is a question of scale. Okay, there is a predicted shortage of teachers of about 25 million, I think, by 2030. And this is really a substantial problem. AI is seen as a solution to this problem. But how do we balance between scaling up our best pedagogical practices and reaching out to the unreachable so far, and the individual needs of the learners? These are the challenges, and we do need to consider them in the context of this multifaceted, multidimensional discipline that AI affords us. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for this very exciting presentations, which I'm very sorry to have cut off, but I need to be accountable. OK, c'est la prochaine portion, donc c'est... OK, si vous voulez des questions, OK. C'est parce que c'était pas... Oui, d'accord. Alors, on a des questions. Oui, certainement. Donc, je propose 20 minutes pour des questions, 15-20 minutes au max. Avant qu'on pose des questions, peut-être on pourrait se lever un petit peu, juste bouger les épaules. Oh oui, respirer, parce que là, il y en a qui ont mal aux fesses. Bon, d'accord. Et puis, je me suis aussi fait dire que le bureau de vote est ouvert. Ceux qui veulent y aller peuvent y aller. Il ne faut pas qu'on y aille tous en même temps pendant la pause. Mais en même temps, il faut qu'on reste pour la période de questions aussi pour faire honneur à nos conférenciers et conférencières. Donc, voilà, les questions sont ouvertes pour nos deux conférencières.
I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask
Vas-y.
Kaśka. We might start with that if you have questions.
In the microphone.
Oh, yeah. Merci. If you have questions in the audience, too, you want to start? Go ahead. No, that's fine. I'll get to ask my questions, so you can... You're welcome to start. You just need a microphone. Okay. All right.
A question related to think and act, which is interesting in your paper, and the way to think and to act. With artificial intelligence, the way is related to calculation. Okay. So can you say something about that? Is thinking related to calculation only, and what can be expected as progresses in artificial intelligence to do larger?
You need 4 hours for that, don't you?
Yeah, I need 4 hours for this. How long do we have?
You don't have 4 hours.
No, I do not think that thinking is just calculation, first of all. I do think that there are certain things that we can formalize quite precisely, and this is something that the field has been doing for many, many years. I mean, the field of AI in education is in existence for about 40 years now, and there's been a lot of work at the intersection of cognitive science and artificial intelligence that looks at how we can actually formulate knowledge, encapsulate knowledge, different types of knowledge in a formal way. And one of the best examples of that, if you want to have a look at those examples, is that of cognitive tutors, which are developed by Carnegie Mellon, colleagues at Carnegie Mellon. historically, this has been the focus of the field, and there has been a lot of optimism at the beginning that we can, that knowledge is something that can be objectively captured and formalized. But obviously, as both the educational research has developed and cognitive science and AI in education, it has become quite clear that this is just one way of looking at learning. And we do have an emerging research, increasing amount of research from, for example, from neuroscience in education, which points to the importance of emotions, for example, in learning. And this is something that has become, so for example, Imordino, Young, and Damasio's paper, which is a beautiful paper, We Feel, Therefore We Learn. I recommend wholeheartedly for you to go and have a look at it. It presents a model of learning, of cognition, which is almost entirely overshadowed by emotions. And so a lot of investment has been put into understanding how emotions impact on learning and how they can be modeled from behaviors. So this has been actually a huge focus of research in artificial intelligence. So the story is much more complicated than that. How we think, no, it's not a calculation alone. There are a lot of contextual factors that come to play, and also subjective reality of individual learners that will affect how information is transformed into knowledge and how knowledge is actually applied and whether it's applied in the first place. Now, in terms of the AI and the kind of future thinking and potential, there are two camps. One camp believes that AI can actually to some extent replace the teachers, or some of the tasks that they do that may be possible, and that has been the early kind of development in the field. And the other camp is, and it's a recent actually development in the field, is that AI should be blended. So AI and HI, artificial intelligence, human intelligence, should be blended, and that the challenge is at finding the right balance between the two. And in fact, in the example that I rushed through from one of my projects, the ability to actually display the data back to the learners and to the teachers is really critical, because in this context, AI doesn't try to emulate or replicate human teachers' behaviors. It serves more like a provocation. So in a way, it doesn't matter whether its models are correct or not. As long as there is a human in the loop, that can be discussed. And we have found with these kinds of data displays that are referred to as open learner models, because we're opening them up, and we found there is plenty of research on open learner models which show that actually that provocation is where learning happens. This is where the critical episodes of learning take place.
Il y a une autre question là-bas. Où se trouve le micro? Il y a une autre question là. Et après vous, monsieur, ce sera la dernière question.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. Just a short question. You are an expert in artificial intelligence. Can you tell us if in the framework of your work or over research works, if artificial intelligence can support, can help disadvantaged students, vulnerable students especially?
Vulnerable students,
yes.
Disabled students.
Disabled students, vulnerable students, yes. It depends.
Before I answer this, I just would like to say that AI is just a tool, and it's the way that you apply that tool that will determine whether it's effective or not. So it's like any other tool in education. This is my personal view. In terms of the special needs of vulnerable learners, yes, there is a lot of research. I've done some of this research as well on how AI can be used to support those learners. So, for example, there's actually quite a lot of work in relation to autism. Some of this work, again, I've been involved in, where AI can serve, AI, for example, with the artificial agents, can serve as a stepping stone to the interactions, for example, with humans, because, you know, I mean, depending obviously on the needs, on the special needs, this can actually serve, you know, these kinds of learners very, very well. There are examples, other examples, innovative examples of using AI, for example, as a social prosthetic. I'm still with the autism or any kind of social communication difficulties, where you can use detection sensing technologies to then create models of social situations, which can then be used to advise in real time. And so I think that's a really potentially very exciting research avenue. I mean, still in the lab, it's still not really out there, but these are the kinds of things that are being explored. The example that I have taken, I have presented earlier, is from a project where we worked with really vulnerable young people between 16 and 25 who, well, we defined them for the project as at risk of social exclusion, but the truth is that we actually worked with a lot of kids who were already excluded, completely excluded. And many of them never had a chance to participate in a job interview, let alone practice, you know, and develop their skills. And it has been a very revelatory experience for them to be able to practice these kinds of skills, to see themselves in situations that they never imagined themselves being in. So, you know, there are many different ways in which AI can be used, and I really insist on drumming in the message that AI is not here to replace. AI is here to, this is how I see it, and how I see the potential of AI. It is here to enhance our current capabilities and to help us become better than what we are. And that includes also exposing our biases, by the way.